Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at ancient Egypt, one of the most important early civilizations in human history. Whenever we consider looking at an early civilization, we have to first look at the geographic features that played a role in the way they developed. Whenever we look at Egypt, one of the most important aspects that you understand is the importance of the Nile River to these people. Egypt's lifeline was the Nile River. They literally depended on it for so many things, and it became a god to them. And I really mean a living God. They wrote poems to it, practiced to it, prayed to it, and they literally worshipped it like it was a living God. They did so because it played such a large role in their life. Once they learned how to control and predict these floods, they used irrigation systems to allow water to make it to certain villages and allowed them to grow crops more effectively in outer regions away from the Nile River. The importance of this river really lies in the fact that they believed that it was alive. And they believed that it was alive because of all the life and fertility that was associated with it. After it flooded, the land that was left behind was extremely fertile. And this is one of the reasons why they believed that the Nile River was a living God, one that they needed to pray to all the time in order for it to give its fruits of life and grant the fertile soil to the Egyptian people. But whenever we look at Egyptian history is more than just the Nile River. It's actually an understanding of how these people became one of the most important civilizations in early history. When we look at early Egypt, it's broken down into three major kingdoms: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom is where we can find some of their greatest architectural achievements. The pyramids were still built during that period, and you are talking about one of the greatest marvels in human history. They were man-made, still stand today, and most scientists and historians still believe they're some of the greatest built and most well-constructed pieces of architectural achievement in human history. Another aspect of this that you need to focus on is King Menes. King Menes is the first man to ever unite Upper and Lower Egypt. This was an achievement because Upper and Lower Egypt were fighting for a long time before him. King Menes began the rule of the pharaohs. The pharaohs claimed that they were chosen by God to rule. But unfortunately, even though he was chosen by God to rule, the size of the empire and the size of the civilization itself became too large that he had to create a system known as a bureaucracy. This is where a government is ruled by numerous people rather than just one man. So even though the pharaoh was in the most important part of the government, he had viziers or governors help him control the size of his empire, control the people in different areas of his land, and more importantly, they allowed him to do his job more effectively. Because of this, Egypt was a very well-run government, literally a very well-run society. One of the other things that was created during the Old Kingdom were hieroglyphics. These are some of the greatest pieces of historical evidence we have in history because they teach us so much about a culture that use some of the most sophisticated architectural skills and writing skills that we've ever found. Alright, we move from the study of this early history to looking at their hierarchy, meaning how the society itself was laid out. As you can see, the pharaohs at the top, followed by the viziers, royal overseers. Again, this is what a bureaucracy looks like. They share power in order to control, and if you look on the very bottom, you see the farmers and the laborers. So this is literally how Egyptian society was broken down, and it's the pharaoh at the top, the viziers, royal overseers, district governors, scribes, artisans, and farmers. The idea is that a hierarchy allows the society to be more organized and more effective. The Middle Kingdom was not as successful as the Old Kingdom. As a matter of fact, the Middle Kingdom is just a period of chaos that lasted for around 400 years. And lots of fighting, lots of killing, lots of violence until the Middle Kingdom ends and gives birth to the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom is important because we see a lot of the world's most famous pharaohs. Some of the people that historians still study today, they lived during this time. So what we're going to do now is look at a couple of these important pharaohs, starting with Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is extremely important because, one, she's a woman. Two, she was a pharaoh, and that, again, is a very rare thing. So when we look at someone like Hatshepsut, she was a ruthless woman who became the pharaoh of one of the greatest civilizations in the world. And the reason that we look at her is because she did exactly what the men did. She built temples, she increased trade, she allowed Egypt to flourish. Okay? Now, even though her success was great, there are still other pharaohs that seem to be more interesting to us. One of the most famous is King Tut, or Tutankhamun. King Tut plays a large role in our life because he is one of the most mysterious of all the pharaohs. He is called King Tut. He was the boy king. He became king at the age of 9, but died mysteriously at the age of 19. Now, recently, they've done more and more tests to figure out what killed him. They found out that he did hit his head, but it's inconclusive whether or not they can say without a doubt that he was either struck or fell from a horse or fell from something high. But the thing that is so important about this king is not that he ruled at 9, because there are many leaders that ruled at 9, ruled younger than that. King Louis XIV of France became king at the age of 4. So it's not amazing for a young boy to become king. What is, however, important is what we found in the early 1900s. In 1922, King Tut's tomb was found. And the reason that King Tut's tomb is so important because it was the first pharaoh's tomb to be found completely intact, not rifled through by people who had stolen from pharaohs before. And it was a perfect house for all of his artifacts. And what it does give us is a great look as to what a pharaoh had and how a pharaoh was treated during this time. So when you look at some of these images, these are just some of the walls, and in the middle here to the bottom right you can see his sarcophagus. This is just some of the stuff that the archaeologists found. Gold-laden chairs, and we're talking about solid gold all over. All right? It is one of the most amazing discoveries in recent historical studies. All right, when we look at Ramses II, Ramses II is probably the most famous of all the pharaohs because you can find him in the Bible. He is the most famous pharaoh because he is the rumored brother of Moses. He is also the man who is guilty of, holding the Jews hostage and eventually letting them go. But he ruled for over 60 years. He also is rumored to have over 100 children. He is one of the most important pharaohs because he is extremely powerful. Also, he helped expand the power of the Egyptian people. He helped expand their civilization, and he helped keep the civilization going for many more centuries. Alright, so when we look at Egyptian society, those are just some of the important rulers. However, society remained the same through all the rulers. One, the main aspect of the society was agricultural, meaning that most of the people that lived there farmed. But this, like all other societies, especially in China and Mesopotamia, you are looking at a patriarchy or a male-dominated society. But one thing that is important to realize that women in Egypt had more rights than in Mesopotamia. But on the flip side of that, Egypt traded much less than Mesopotamia. So it's very important to note these two commonalities. That women had more rights in Egypt than Mesopotamia, but one of the things that makes Egypt important as well is the fact that they did not trade as much as Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia again being the Fertile Crescent or Babylon, Sumer, and all those other ancient Middle Eastern civilizations. They had an extremely strict social class, but you can rise up. You didn't have to be a citizen at first in order to become part of it, but you could eventually rise through society, rise through the ranks, and rise in class. And one of the things that does set them apart is their religion. Now, even though it was polytheistic, and even though they do share a lot of commonalities with the people of Babylon and Sumer, Fertile Crescent, etc., the idea is that their religion was a mix of both man and animal. They believed that their gods were mixtures of these, and you can actually find, and if you look at these pictures, you can find numerous references of these kinds of gods in many other cultures for a few more centuries. They played a huge influence on societies that lived around them. Another thing, they believed in reincarnation, which is not a, it's not a new belief. Hindus believe it, Buddhists believe it, but most people don't realize that the Egyptians did believe in the afterlife. This picture here depicts the weighing of the soul and the judgment after death. And if you have a good life, again, you are released from it, released from rebirth, but if not, you have to live it again. That's the belief. It's amazing that you find so many similarities in these early civilizations that appear later on. So maybe there is some cultural diffusion that that you guys really need to pay attention to, especially because Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India did trade with one another. One of the other aspects of ancient Egypt we look at are their achievements. Probably the most notable achievement is the hieroglyphics. Now, hieroglyphics are still found today. They began over 5,000 years ago. They're based on pictures. They're called pictographs. But not everybody was educated enough to read or understand it. So they developed something called hieratic script, which is a simpler version of hieroglyphics in order for them to keep base records and write quickly rather than this illustration based pictographs that they put all over the pharaoh's tomb. In 1799, the Rosetta Stone was found, and because of that, we were able to figure out how to decipher hieroglyphics. It was found by Napoleon, and it is one of the most important discoveries of the last 1,000 years. Another one of their achievements lies in their art and architecture. Again, we talked about their pyramids earlier, but the reason that their pyramids are so important is because it shows their architectural ability. They are probably one of the most gifted civilizations in the history of world civilizations, and it's extremely important that you realize that their architectural ability is rivaled by many other groups. But it just goes to show you that even though they did not have modern technology, the technology that existed during the times of these ancient civilizations was great enough to create some of the world's greatest structures. They also made numerous advancements in math. Not only math, but science as well. They literally calculated area, volume. They did some very, very, very high-level math that you need to also consider. But one of the most interesting ones that most kids and most people are interested in is mummification. In mummification, it is a very, very detailed process that only the pharaohs went through. And being detailed and being very, very difficult to perform, it is very ritualistic. They preserved the body of the pharaoh by first draining all the blood, removing all the organs, but keeping the four most important organs in jars. The jars kind of look like this. These jars here are each protected by a god. And the idea is that when the pharaoh went to the afterlife, he needed these organs in order to pass to the next world. That's why those organs were kept next to the pharaoh's body. They're wrapped in linens. They are literally surrounded with gold, jewels, gems, things that were worthy of the pharaoh while he was alive. But one of the things people forget is that a pharaoh needs servants in the afterlife. So most of the time, the peasants and slaves were put with the pharaoh in order to die with him to serve him in the afterlife. It took 70 days to complete this process, and when the process is over, this is what the person looks like. They are wrapped in cloth and eventually put in what's known as a sarcophagus and entombed in there, in some cases for many, many centuries. We are still finding new pharaohs as archaeologists all over the world are trying to learn more about our previous past. Their other achievement is in medicine. One of their greatest achievements is the study of anatomy. They literally performed the world's first autopsies, and they learned a lot about the interior of the human anatomy because of these kinds of, I guess we can call them attempted surgeries, because a lot of the surgeries did not lead to many savings. They didn't save many people. A lot of people died during surgery. But they did perform basic surgeries. They did perform basic anatomy. And through these two practices, they literally were able to understand the human body a little better. They also used herbs and minerals and allowed people to live a little longer. They did a lot of things that will benefit a number of countries later on. So when you look at civilizations like this, you guys have to understand that the importance of these civilizations plays a large role in the groups that follow them. That's it for this one. I'll see you